What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel Sportsbooks, but more from them later. We're coming at you with another recap of the Dynasty. We got episodes 3 and 4. Episode 3, Borrowed Time, which mainly focused on the whole situation when the Patriots actually went to the Super Bowl in 2001, what kind of happened in that Pittsburgh game that sent them there, as well as some context on how Robert Kraft bought the team, kind of making some sly maneuvers, savvy businessman that he is, and then also his relationship with Bill Parcells, kind of what went down when they went to the Super Bowl back in 96 before everything happened. And obviously, things went sour. Really interesting. And then we got Spygate, which we talked about, Mike, as probably the best episode so far. Like, it's just such a juicy storyline already, and actually getting to hear firsthand from everybody was really cool. But before we get into it, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. This is a fun little week by week thing that we got with this Dynasty thing. I like that they broke it up in bits and, not bits and pieces, but every week, because it gives you, like, we can talk about it every week instead of like having to dissect and digest 10 episodes at once and binge it. It's pretty cool that they release them like this, and you can kind of go 2 by 2. So thanks for doing it. Thanks for having me on. Let's get after it.
Of course. And before we get into it, real quick, I want to touch on Steve Belichick, new defensive coordinator from the University of Washington, son of Bill Belichick, obviously, went on Chris Long's Greenlight podcast and dropped some pretty interesting nuggets, some stuff about his dad, what he might be doing, how he felt about that whole situation. Also touched on the Patriots linebackers room, which I thought was pretty interesting, considering outside of Judon and Uche, the Patriots linebackers get like no attention. But he mentioned how Jelani Tavai, both he and Chris agreed, is a stud. Talk about Anthony Chen, really great years. So before we get into the Dynasty, real quick, what did you think about his appearance?
I thought it was cool to see him kind of open up. You never really got that when he was here. Like, he would, he did his bi-weekly, whatever it was, bi-monthly, like, positional coach interview with us, but it was cookie cutter, and again, it was because he was working for his dad, and so I get it. But for him to and he had gone on Chris Long's podcast like last year, 2 years ago, and I remember seeing it a couple years ago, kind of, but it wasn't like this. And I think it's because he can open up a little bit, and he didn't say anything. And I always use the word groundbreaking, especially talking about these dynasties. Like, there was no like inside scoops or news, but just to, for him to open up. And I thought it was interesting that he said that his dad is pursuing other things and maybe might do TV. He had some good words to say about Mayo. I thought it was interesting that he said it was Mayo's time. So I didn't know if that was like he was kind of like, we knew it was time for my dad to move on or whatever. But cool. And he sounds just like Bill. Like, Chris Long asked him about what he's going to bring and not bring from the Patriots to Washington. And he was like, look, I've been wanting to be my own man ever since my dad left Cleveland. And they laughed at that because I thought that was kind of like, because everybody freaking hated him in Cleveland.
Right. Now we know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we talked about that last week about the him in Cleveland and the Bernie Kosar thing. But no, it was cool to hear him talk and say that I want to be my own guy and build relationships. And what he said about Mayo too, how they kind of used their linebackers room as like a way to get away from the team without actually having to get away from the team, that they would just kind of open up and, like a study hall type vibe where it's just like, we're on the same level as you as players and coaches. So I thought it was cool. I'm looking forward to see what he does in Washington. And he does sound just like Bill, which he said, which I find that kind of hilarious too.
If you close your eyes, you really can't tell
who
exactly he's talking. And it was funny when he was talking about how different it is. Like, when you're in college, he's like, I had to FaceTime a high schooler. That was pretty different. Right. All the different recruiting stuff. That was really funny.
Well, did you see when he like panned to like where his office is? Because his office
gorgeous.
His office in Foxborough, he was saying, was just like a little cubicle type thing, like one window in the entire coach's room that you can't see shit. And then he takes his camera and pans it, and he's like looking right over the Washington Huskies football field, kind of like what you see. You know how in Dynasty when they show Kraft in the old stadium where his office is overlooking the field, it kind of looks like that. So that was pretty cool. But no, I like seeing the one. It obviously stinks that the Patriots of old are going away, but Dynasty and Steve opening up and maybe Bill eventually talking on TV and things like that. Like, that's the one really cool thing about this, is kind of being able to dissect and digest what the heck happened here for 20 years. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so moving on to episode 3, Borrowed Time. What were some of your big takeaways from this episode? Before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, what were the big thoughts? Because they did touch on, they had the time jump where you started in the playoffs, then went back and it was back to the Super Bowl. Honestly, I kind of got whiplash when they went back to the Super Bowl. I was like, oh crap, okay, we're going here. And then they kind of ran through the first dynasty after that one Super Bowl. I know our buddy Alex Barth was
that was unfair. I agree.
Yeah. It was a little odd, but given this is a pretty meaty documentary series, so you kind of understand you have to go through some stuff pretty quickly. They probably shouldn't get a lot of material from that part of the dynasty. In that first one, obviously so many things happened. Like they talk about how Brady just shot to the top of pop culture. Everybody wanted a piece of him, and Jackie McMillan said everything the Patriots touched turned to gold until well, we're going to talk about in the next episode.
Him saying Kraft saying too, he got a call from the president and was like, yeah, we want him to be at the president's dinner. I was in the suite or something. I was like, this is just it's crazy.
And how I was like, that's kind of weird, honestly.
I know, but yeah, like you said with Jackie McMullen though, saying everything turns to gold, and they weren't just at the top of the sports world, they were the top of the world, pop culture, everything. Brady's on GQ magazines, and I think Bill did a couple sitcom cameos and stuff, and it was crazy. Yeah, I forget when it was, but I saw that the other day, and so it's just I guess my big takeaway with episode 3 was that this was sort of the last episode where everything's all good and peachy and we're the best team and rainbows and butterfly, you know what I mean? It's just after that, and we'll get into Spygate, it kind of starts to get dark, and it really started to get dark at the end of this one where Pioli and Bruschi are talking about it becomes an addiction. And I think Pioli's and I talked about it last week and I've tweeted about it. I just think Scott Pioli puts this whole thing in such a cool perspective where his comparison to a narcotic where you chase those highs and you get there and it's not the same, and then winning becomes level ground. And then you just got to get back to winning just to feel normal. It's so true, but you never think of it like that until he puts it in that perspective. So,
even as a fan, you kind of get that. When he was talking about it, I didn't really even watch football for the first dynasty. I kind of started getting into the NFL in 2010. And you do kind of feel that. When they were winning Super Bowls, they were competitive. It's it feels a certain kind of way. When they lost, it was just what the hell just happened?
Right. I mean, and then when you win, it's a relief. It's oh, thank God they won the freaking Super Bowl. Not hell yeah, they won the Super Bowl. Yeah, it's nuts. So yeah, that was my big thing, was just that they talk about, and we'll get into it, but the start of the Patriot way and do your job. Damian Woody said something about that stuff. So it's kind of the last foundational episode piece of the really good happy-go-lucky Patriots, I guess.
Yeah, and hey, let's talk about that. So do your job, and then the Patriot way, where Damian Woody said the origin of do your job was kind of Belichick trying to put everything into perspective before the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And Teddy Bruschi mentioned that he thought the origin of the Patriot way was $100 million quarterback Drew Bledsoe taking it on the chin and kind of going into the backseat to let Tom Brady do his thing, win the Super Bowl. Obviously have that line, or we kind of got a tweak on it where it's the epic go out there and sling it, where Brady, he added a little bit in between and then use that as the cap. I was honestly, I was wondering when it was going to come. I was, these guys tell these stories over and over again. Right. I was honestly, that kind of elongated version was pretty cool. But what did you think about that? Actually getting a peek into how those things started, and Bruschi acknowledging that if there is a Patriot way, then that's kind of when it did start. Because some people don't really, Brady and Belichick will be that's not a thing. We've never used that term. Right. I don't know what you're talking about. But some people are no, it's, you feel it, but we don't call it that.
Yeah. I'm not, again, and I talked about it last week, but I just have this newfound respect for Drew Bledsoe over the first few episodes. And again, it was impossible for him to have to sit in that, situation, right? You mentioned $100 million quarterback, supposed to be the man. And granted, and people have pushed back on me for this over the last couple of weeks when I've sort of touted Drew Bledsoe. He wasn't great towards this part of his career, and he started hot and he went to Super Bowl, but he was still warranted a $100 million contract, and he was still the best thing that the franchise had and seen up until that point. So there's nothing else to really compare it to at the time. Anyway, but for him to sort of take that backseat and have to, like you say, wear that on the chin, and he goes and he wins that AFC Championship game, and then he talks about the conversation he had with Belichick where he brings him in. He's yeah, Tommy's ankle looks good. We're gonna go with him, and he was just crushed again. Like he gets hit, gets literally crushed, falls down, tries to build himself back up, gets hit when Bill says they're sticking with Brady. Then he climbs the mountain again in the AFC Championship game and then gets kicked back down again. And, Bruschi talked about how he could have really effed things up and been sour and been salty. And, he had some bits and pieces in his locker room, not stand up scrums where he's like, yeah, I want to compete for my job and I'm very disappointed. And but again, that's what you have to say. And he's just telling the truth. But then they show clips of him on the sideline with Brady and wearing the headset and being in his ear. And they show him walking the field with a play card, before the Super Bowl, little stuff. And that's just little stuff, but it's things that, he could have sat on the bench with his, with his middle finger up saying I don't want to do this anymore. And he didn't. So I think that's really cool. And then you talk about, I think of three things with Bledsoe in the Super Bowl where it's before the game where him and Brady are pounding helmets in the tunnel. That's awesome.
I was going to get you there.
Yeah, right. And then the second part where in the game, we just talked about it, him saying, F it, go sling it. And then after the game where he's like, you are the man, you're the man, Brady. I don't know. I think it's really cool that, again, that Patriot way that Bruschi talked about, it did start with Bledsoe and he could have really messed things up and he didn't, and he wore it, So I thought that whole, storyline was pretty cool from episode 3 too.
And how about Kraft and Parcells' relationship, which seems like it's still not on great grounds?
It's not.
Where Kraft said, I didn't think he really had the team's best interest at heart. But then Parcells is like, well, Kraft didn't have a lot of football background and was giving power to other people and not really to me. And I'm kind of like, all right, well, I'm kind of just sitting here. They clearly are not very happy with each other, but how did you, we didn't get a lot of new stuff, but it was interesting hearing, to this day, it's the same. And then, of course, Robert Kraft has said since then he did learn from that whole Bill Parcells experience that he did need to take a step back and kind of give somebody the power. But he also mentioned, I wanted somebody who was all in, which gave him the, comfort level to say, okay, we know it took a while for Bill to get supreme power over the organization. Right. But, he still did want to not be as involved in team matters.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the conversation between personnel power and just coaching kind of came full circle this year with Belichick too, where, he kind of stunk up the joint as a personnel guy for the last couple of years. And it ruined what he could coach on the field. And so they weren't going to pull that from him because, again, I think, Robert sort of evolved from that when he did it and learned from his lesson with Parcells, but the animosity towards each other is still pretty interesting. And again, to this day, Kraft rarely will talk about Bill Parcells, and everyone argues every time the Patriots Hall of Fame inductions come around, oh, Parcells has to get in, Parcells has to that's never happening. They're not going to let it happen. And he's always nominated and things like that. But I just don't see it. But I do, and I like how, the whole, how they're going to make the dinner and not shop for the groceries, that whole thing kind of comes to light. And it's again, the bouncing back and forth on the timeline kind of makes the episode awkward, I'm going to be honest, because it's kind of they don't really tell the full story. They go from the Super Bowl to Parcells and then back to the Super Bowl. But just hearing the two of them, speak it themselves was pretty cool because it's always kind of hearsay and rumors, and everyone was like, well, we didn't know if Parcells was going to go to the Jets or when that'll happen. And then Parcells straight up was like, I knew I wasn't going back to the Patriots. And as much respect as I have for Bill Parcells as a coach, it's kind of a shitty thing to do to hang your team out to dry like that and kind of know that that's what's going to happen. And at times you do have to think for yourself and not for the team, especially when you're not getting what you want as a a but to kind of
more transparent though, he didn't tell anybody. It was just all right, the vibe is weird, something's going on, and it was more rumors.
Right. And then I know I'd be curious to see or hear what he said to the team during those times. Cause you see the Spygate stuff, and we'll talk about that, where Bill is in the locker room, shut the F up. Don't think about it. And I'm sure that they had more conversations about what happened, what didn't, and where to go from here. It kind of feels like Parcells just kind of left it out in the air and out in the open. So weird thing, but cool to see it rehashed. And some things you don't really fully understand. I watched the episode, and I'm also simultaneously on Wikipedia and searching up other stuff, researching oh, how did this happen? How did this go down? The Terry Glenn thing where he wanted some defensive end and the team took Terry Glenn, and he was pissed about that. it's going back to what I said before, to be able to, now that the dynasty is really over, to rehash it and, re-see things is pretty cool. So.
And then we'll fast forward back to the actual Super Bowl. We got some good nuggets there. Like Mike, it was really, like I said, I kind of got whiplash, but got some interesting perspective from Mike Martz, who was saying, he sounded kind of salty, but also knew that he would sound salty and was like, hey, this is why I haven't said any of this stuff before.
Yeah, he waited 20 years for it.
Which, you got to kind of respect, because, he was right, where he's like, yeah, they knew in the Super Bowl, they weren't going to call holding, they weren't going to call PI, and especially back then. Like, it's not this kind of version of the NFL where in the playoffs, the rest will take it over. And
that's also, that's good gamesmanship. Like, that's not, again, we can get into cheating and Spygate, but if you're holding on to a guy, you're blatantly pulling a penalty. If they're not going to call it, that's not on you. That's on the referee. And so then that's on Mike Marks to say, they're holding my guys, watch for it. And then you fix it after that. But it was funny that he was like, I knew that they were going to call me a crybaby. And he starts doing this. I thought he was really good in that, because again, what he says was, I didn't want to do this 20 years ago, but now is my time to kind of say what I was feeling. And salty, yes, but he was laughing and pretty good about it. So that was
yeah. When he first started, I was like, oh, and then he kind of went on. I was like, all right, no, I get where you're coming from. And even Richard Seymour was like, yeah, we wanted to be the guys you didn't want to see in a dark alley. Right. And they beat the crap out of the Rams. And we know, their whole game plan with Marshall Faulk was, anytime he comes out of the backfield, hit him. Their game plan revolved around either keeping him in the backfield or beating the crap out of him anytime you try to get him the route. Obviously, one of the greatest dual threats of all time. And then you get just it's a storybook where, again, we'll talk about later with Brewski, where he was like, oh, wow, now I understand how it feels to be on the other side of it. But them as the underdogs being like, we really got this thing. And we got Ernie Adams was saying, yeah, we're basically pitched a shutout. And then the last 10 minutes, everything went to hell. And I know you wrote about the John Madden part and how kind of funny that was, where he completely went against what the Patriots actually plan to do. But what'd you think about how the game actually went down?
Before the game, I thought is the coolest thing, where they go out as a team. And it's cliche, and maybe some people think it's corny, but for America's team, quote unquote, the red, white, and blue at that time, 9/11, this whole thing. And not that part's corny, but the part where we're going out as a team and not as an individual is that has changed Super Bowls ever since then. A lot of teams just come out as a team now, because now you kind of look like you're playing for yourself and not as a team if you do get introduced one by one. You know what I mean? Right. So and apparently the league pushed back on them at first too when they wanted to do that, and they were like, no, you have to do it individually. And Belichick and Lawyer Malloy and guys were like, no, we got here as a team. We're being introduced as a team. And to hear John Bon Jovi be like, holy shit, this is my team coming out as one. And the way they say it over the loudspeaker, instead choosing to come out as a team, and they're all shooting their hands in the air, fireworks going off. I just thought that was and again, it changed Super Bowls forever. So for Belichick to have the wherewithal to be no, this is why, we're doing this, and this is why, I thought was really, it shows why they were so successful for so long, because you always had to put the team first. And for the game itself, I guess, like you said, the game plan to hit them all and, hit everybody as hard and loud as you can. And I wrote about it a little bit more too, but how even John Madden said, this is what Belichick told me pregame, is that this is what they're going to do. And they're just going to beat the shit out of these guys. And they want to take them off their game. And they were able to do it for a long time. And then all of a sudden, 14 points later, the thing's tied. And I know you wanted to get into that next, so we can go from here. But they wrote the game plan and they played it to a T.
And then we kind of going back to the introduction. That was the part where I thought Martz was being kind of salty, because he's like, oh, I see the red, white, and blue because of 9/11. And I was like, all right, dude, maybe take a step back. It's oh, the Pats fans. I was like, the Pats fans, sure, but let's have a little bit of perspective. There was
it was after 9/11. They changed the logo for it. Everybody was wearing red, white, and blue for the Patriots, but also for the country. And Mike Martz is they basically made it a Patriots home game. It's all right, come on.
Let's take a step back there. Yeah. But then one of the really cool parts is we got the perspective from Ernie Adams, saying the reason that they decided to actually go for it was he was looking and saying, Bill asked, what do you want to do, Ernie? And he's like, our defense is tired. If we go into overtime and they get the ball, I don't think we're going to be able to stop them. And like you said earlier, they were 10 minutes and then they kind of just fell off the cliff. And you see, like the touchdown, I think it was Ricky Prohl. Yeah, where he kind of reverse field and goes into the end zone. Just a terrible, terrible angle. I'm not sure who it was. Again, this Patriots team was before my time. Yeah. But you just see the angle and they have to turn around and it's like, oh, God. Like either the brains fell out of their head or they really were just gassed because they had to like play so physical. Eventually, that kind of thing wears down on you. Like you heard about man coverage. It's hard to play man coverage for an entire game because it's very physically demanding. And that's the same if you're trying to like hit guys constantly. Right. But then Brady gets the opportunity and we get the legendary interaction that he had where people were telling him, like, yeah, take care of the ball. And Bledsoe was like, nah, don't do that. So, what you think about the end of the game?
I don't know if it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, honestly, that Ernie Adams, like, took all the credit for them going for it. Like, he was like, I don't know. Like, to me, it was like I kind of thought of it as like a Belichick decision. And maybe I'm making something out of nothing. But it felt like, I always thought of it as, well, Belichick wanted to go with Brady, and Belichick was the only one who trusted Brady, and everybody wanted Bledsoe, but he stuck by him. And so then you're in this situation. Everybody still thinks you don't trust Brady. Then Bill was like, no, I trust this guy to go down. When the way Ernie Adams said it, and I wonder if this is true. I mean, I guess you have to take him at his word, but he says that Bill asked him, Ernie, what do you want to do here? And Ernie says, let's go for it because our defense is gassed. So, again, maybe that's me making too much of it, but it really felt like he was kind of trying to take all the credit for it. But as the drive goes, I love the John Madden call, and like that gets better over time. Like everyone talks about it, but every time you hear it, he's like, they shouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this. I'd play for overtime. I'd sit on it. And then he completes that like 30-yard throw to Troy Brown. And then Madden's like, oh, I kind of like what they're doing here now. Like, no shit, they're in field goal range now. Like, of course you like it. But the Brady to have like the guts and the balls to go do that as a second-year player after all that. And then when he spikes the ball and it lands perfectly in his hand, it's just like, okay.
That's awesome. Poetry.
It's insane. Like, it's just, like you said, it's poetry. It's fate. Kraft talks about how God was on their side for this one. And I just thought it was cool. Adam Vinatieri too, like for this one exactly. We'll get to that, but I mean Vinatieri clutch as ever. Like I just thought I don't understand how people go and do that like week after week. Like Vinatieri does it in the Snow Bowl, he does it this, and then he does it in like 3 more Super Bowls. Like incredible. And so then the legend of them begins, and we'll get into all that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much about the Ernie Adams thing, but that kind of I don't know. I rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
I think it's true. I get where you're coming from. And then just to kind of put a bow on this, I thought like Brady, what was he like 23 at that point? And he said after the Super Bowl, he was like, I was exhausted. I didn't even go to celebrate, which is pretty wild for a young kid. Like you think the adrenaline would still be pumping. He was like, no, I was tired. I needed to go. And then the next day he says that like he and Bill got into a car together or something and he could smell the booze still on Bill. And
Bill's like still drunk.
That, right. And gave him that Bill Belichick style compliment where he was like, yeah, had a pretty good year, Tom. It's like, oh, yeah, I guess that was his way of giving me a compliment.
That was just the perfect summation of, like, their relationship. And you'll get into that, and we'll get into it later in the show itself. But, everyone knows that Bill's not one to give compliments, and Tom got sick and tired of not being treated like somebody who was the greatest player of all time. And I thought it was funny that even from the start, Bill was like, it took him 20 weeks for him to finally be like, yeah, you are all right this year, kid. Like, yeah, no shit. I just won a Super Bowl. Like, come on, man. But that was funny.
And then also cool that they were, Jackie McMillan said that they were comparing Brady to Joe Montana after his second Super Bowl win, which is funny because as we know, he completed the dynasty, then actually like ascended to being an elite quarterback, even though they weren't winning Super Bowls. And people were saying like, oh, like he'll never be Montana. And it's like, well, you were already saying it. He did the damn thing. And then obviously, as we know, and I'm excited to see the next episodes where they talk about the second dynasty, but I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, we are going to get into Spygate, my favorite episode so far. But first, quick word from my friends at FanDuel. Be right back.
Get your buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams. Quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/Boston and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
All right, moving on to Spygate. There was a lot of interesting, pretty funny stuff in this episode, honestly. Like, we got the whole introduction where there was like the former private eye or whatever was he? He was like he would go undercover or whatever. Yeah. And then he decided he wanted to be a jet security guy and was kind of painted as the hero, which is a little bit odd, especially because we know that it's not like it was some random thing. They knew where the cameras were for a certain reason we'll get into. We heard about, we had Robin Glazer, who's now Gerard Mayo's right-hand woman, actually kind of reenacted walking through the hallway with a hammer, which I thought
with the hammer over her shoulder was bizarre.
Right. I was like, okay, that's okay, sure. That's definitely a choice. And then Ernie Adams and Bill being like, no, I'm not talking about it. And Ernie was kind of tweaking a little bit. He was drinking his water. He's like, I'll talk about other stuff. I don't want to talk about this. So, clearly stuff you probably didn't want to let slip. But how'd you feel about this episode overall?
The Randy Moss pan in where Josh is like, we needed an alpha, and then they just pan the camera over to Randy Moss's face. That was probably the coolest thing in this episode to me. He didn't even speak. It was just the cinematography of that, where it's just they needed this, and he was the effing man, and he made it happen for 17 weeks. I thought that was cool. Ernie was, like you said, tweaking. That's probably my biggest takeaway of the entire dynasty so far. All the Pioli stuff, and then Ernie. And say what you will about Spygate, and whether it mattered, whether it gave them advantage, disadvantage, I don't really care about that conversation. I do, and you kind of have to, but I mean, they did something they weren't supposed to, and they got punished for it. And it's not like Deflategate or the Spygate thing with the Rams where it wasn't true and Deflategate was pretty much a farce. This happened and they got punished for it. So that's what it was. But Ernie was, they might as well have painted his hands red for the scene. He was sitting there I don't want to talk. I'm good. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And then I was watching that. I was like, holy shit. This dude is guilty as all hell. And I just thought that was kind of funny because, everyone knows, everyone knew it, but to see it kind of happen that way was funny. And then Robin, it's funny how that whole, when Bill leaves and there's the Wickersham thing, when they talk about Robin Glazer and Jonathan Kraft, whatever. And everyone's like, who is this lady? Who is it? What does she do? And then for her to be in the doc, I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of funny. And she was a integral, I guess, part of Spygate, where they went to her because she was the liaison to the league, and destroying the tapes and making it was kind of weird with the whole hammer thing. And they did the same thing with Ernie in the Snowball game, where they reenacted him going to the stadium. And they have him walking the halls, and they make it try and seem like it was real footage, and it's clearly so fake because Ernie's 40 years older or 30 years older, whatever it is. But overall, this is not an eye-opening episode, but more so you don't really realize they did cheat. And I said it to you and Alex the other day, no, they were cheaters, and whether it helped them or not, that's kind of not that it's not a conversation. I mean, they won, right? They still won. They went 17-0. And, we'll get into it here with the fact that, Bledsoe. There's so many B's. Bledsoe, Brewski, Brady. Brewski is saying that, we were standing up for our coach and he was like, F it, let's just go sling it. And they won 17 games without the cameras that they needed. So they didn't really need them. And that's kind of where this episode's at.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was the emotional side, where we got to see a deeper look into how this impacted the whole thing with Bill. Before we get into Bill and how it affected him and everything, let's talk about Eric Mangini, because you mentioned, Scott Pioli's done a really great series. Yeah. Scott Pioli's done a great job in this docuseries, kind of just weaving together this story.
Yeah,
and the whole part where he says, kind of like a mob thing where you keep things in the family. When you leave the family, you don't make a mess.
Yeah.
And clearly, the Belichick tree is not happy. We know that Belichick and Mangini are not on good terms anymore.
Right.
And the reason that the Jets knew the Pats would be filming them and from where was because, one, I don't think it's coincidence that the Patriots had blown the doors off the Jets in Mangini's first year, 2006, in the playoffs. And then obviously the season opener against the Jets. And then, we found the tapes. And then when they cut to him in the press conference being like, it's a league matter. I don't know. It's just bro.
I know.
Bro. At least own up to it and be like, yeah, no, I knew where the bodies were buried, all that stuff. Don't act like you're just some innocent. And maybe that was politics and that was what he was instructed to do. I don't know. But man, especially when it's something that, one, the Jets were also doing. Let's not forget about that. The Jets did it. Didn't like the league didn't follow up on it when they did it, but they did with the Pats. Like, It's just messy, nasty situation where you kind of see why Belichick, who brought Eric Mangini in the league, like they were together in Cleveland. They'd been together for a very long time, gave him his foot in the door, as Scott Pioli said. And then, I mean, honestly, at least it is cheating. I don't want to make it seem like Patriots were victims or anything, but if you're gonna like go behind his back and say something, at least be like, Bill, if I catch you doing this, like I'm warning you right now, don't do it, or I'm gonna blow the whistle. Like at least,
right.
You know what you were doing when you like. It's just it comes off as so hypocritical and just so spineless, like, if you wanted to tell, sure. But again, when you were participating and knew about it, at least be like, nah, Bill, don't mess with me. I'm serious. Don't play with me.
Almost like give him a chance. Like Pioli says, like keep it in the family until you can't anymore. Like, if you want to be a scumbag about it, like you're right. Give them a chance first. Be like, look, let's not play these games against each other. We know what we do on the sidelines, this, that, and the other thing. Like, let's keep it fair here. You don't do it to me. I don't do it to you. But he didn't, and he just went right to the league after that. And it's like Pioli says how that was really the reason that Bill became so closed off and standoffish from there on out. Like,
which is wild.
It is. And you look in the first two episodes where there's the press conferences with him, and he's laughing a little bit and joking, and like, he's very open, and he's still Bill, but he's a little bit more opened up. And ever since the Mangini thing and Spygate, and I guess rightfully so, because who are you going to trust? And we talk about small staffs now and how Mayo has this big staff, but Bill kind of kept small staffs, like kept the same guys around, Patricia and Judge and McDaniels. He knows he can trust those guys.
And Pioli said he started putting up walls with the people that were close to him. It wasn't just the media. Like
with Pioli himself, Pioli says like that's crazy. And it's too bad. And it's like, you wonder where things would go if that, never happened. And we'd still probably have a similar bill. But I just think, and even Michael Hawley says it too. Like Hawley was like, I thought I knew Bill. And maybe that was more of like I took that more of as like I thought I knew a guy who wasn't a cheater type thing. But it was also like, you had conversations with him, and then all of a sudden he just shut everybody off, including the media.
Like how he carried himself.
Yeah. And so it is crazy. And it really clearly had and still has an effect on him as far as like trusting people and having a trust factor in people.
And they had that interview where he's getting grilled about it.
It looked like a Dateline or like a 60 Minutes interview or something.
I think it was. I've seen it before. I think it was like 60 Minutes. It was like a very real thing where it was a big news program where Bill was just getting hammered with questions. He's like, well, I can't affect how people talk about us outside of this building, but I know we did. And Jack McMillan's like, in this, everybody felt the same way, where it's like Bill Belichick misread the rules or misunderstood the rules. Like, no, it was definitely arrogance. And they did kind of spin it, which was funny because, they put the Patriots on this pedestal for the first few episodes, and then they flip it, and it's like, oh, yeah, you see Bill all happy on the podium, but really, and they're basically implying it in his head. That was when the ego really kicked in, and he was like, I'm Bill, I can do whatever the hell I want.
Right.
And I mean, you do need a certain level of hubris, I feel like, to have that amount of success, like,
of course,
just the confidence and all those things. But it was fascinating to see, especially Pioli acknowledge that there was a shift in how he approached not just us media members, but also the people that worked on his own staff. And as we know, in a certain ways that devolved, and we have no idea if maybe he would have been more, open with his staff, recently, and maybe things now went different. Like, you really have no idea.
Right.
They had another dynasty. It clearly wasn't like a backbreaker for them, but it was just fascinating to see how that devolved. But then that's where things got fun briefly, because we got Brady's input, we got Brewski and everybody being like, we were like, F the league. Where Bill, even Pioli's like, there was a certain vengeance and anger in the building, which was like, oh, I got goosebumps. It's the really cool because you know what they did.
Brewski is another really good storyteller in this, because and he's media prepped now, and he's on ESPN, and he kind of knows how to like lead in and tell something. But like the way he just gets like, Bill never told us, that he was mad, but we knew because that offense kept scoring. And then it's like, he would be like, keep going. And they put up, again, they were the best offense at that time to ever play the game. and they show the clips of Brady and Moss, and I forget if it was that season, but there's a clip of Brady coming off the field and him and Bill are like going nuts together. Like when they just like trounced. Maybe it even wasn't that season, but in this documentary, there's a clip of them coming off the field together, like really pumped up after like just smoking a team. And it's like, we're better than you, and we're better than you without cheating. And we can be that much better and pause off us basically. So I thought that was really cool.
And we've seen that like mic'd up where Brady's on the sideline like, we are not finished, fellas. I didn't know what the context was for that, but seeing it, knowing it was 2007 when they were really just trying to like bury people and step on necks, it was like, oh, that's intense. And this was very sneaky, but when they were in Dallas and they did the with the popcorn there, and then Belichick ate some, I was like, oh yeah, that was peak Petty Bill. To see him kind of like play along with that, I was like, it's one of those things where just knowing his personality, it tells you a lot about. He was like, yeah, no, we're having fun. We're kicking ass. We're not taking names. We don't care what your name is. We're the Patriots. I don't know if they still have it, but they had the record for the widest margin of victory, or like the widest point differential in league history, because they also had a great defense. We talk about the offense. Right. The defense was fantastic. So like they were winning, and it was basically like there were games they were in the third quarter and it was like, all right, this game's over. And they come out the next series and they're throwing 40-yard bombs. Like they really did not care. But then you get to the other side of it, where I texted you guys yesterday, where it was like, it felt very poetic, where they cheat, they get caught, they use it as motivation, and then are just like, everybody and just beat the snot out of teams and then lose in the worst possible way. Jonathan Kraft is like, I'm seeing people throwing up and crying on the ground. He's like, I have to rephrase because I don't know how to describe what I saw because I had never seen that before. Oh, also forgot to mention this. What Jonathan said about the Herald was, especially today to say that was crazy. I don't. We have colleagues at the Herald, like all respect to them, nothing from us. But hearing someone of his stature say what he said, where he's like, oh, I honestly,
they weren't even worth. Like, what did he say? Like they weren't even worth buying at the time or something. Like something that was
like
crazy.
that. And it was like, whoa, man. Like I wonder what the relationship is like now.
I know, me too. And you know that story that came out and it was wrong and whatever, and it was like they ended up redacting it, and they did the right thing. They did the right thing by redacting it, and you know, having journalistic integrity, be like, look, we messed up. We're sorry. We had this wrong. We didn't source this correctly. But I also understand Jonathan's point of view, where like, well, regardless if it was right or wrong, like that still like to this day, people still think they recorded that Rams practice and they didn't. And like the stain's already there, and you kind of try and wipe it up and you cover it up, but some people still see it and some people still know. And like I have, you know, debates with some of my like friends all the time, and like my friend who's not a Patriots fan is always like, well, they cheated, they spied on the Rams practices, and then my other friend is always like, no, they didn't. You don't know anything. And it's like, and again, it's that something where like
his lock screen is the retraction. Like,
right. And so it's like that was crazy, but I get their point of view where like, you know, once you put something in print like that, like it's hard to redact it, and it's hard to get everybody who read it first to know that, well, this was actually wrong. So that was tough.
Speaking of the Krafts, also, what we text each other about directly was when Kraft goes up to Bill, or I guess they passed each other in the hallway or something, and he's on a scale of 1 to 100, how important was you doing this and like considering everything we've built? Like, where did it factor in? And Bill says a 1, and Kraft goes, well, then you're a schmuck. I was like, they do not have that kind of relationship. So that was kind of jaw-dropping.
Yeah. Kraft, and I guess it makes sense. He really used this to kind of, you know, open up, and that's what this is for, right? And so, again, the behind closed doors, like you're going to have those type of relationships where like, you cheat, you my employee, like I'm going to be pissed at you and I'm going to call you a schmuck. But for him to come out and say it was like, holy shit, like that was kind of wild. When I heard him say that, like he says it and he looks in the camera, he's like, you're a real schmuck. And I was like, holy crap. Like that was nuts too.
Schmuck.
Yeah, right.
That was
like,
funny.
Yeah.
So then the actual Super Bowl. What were your big ones? Because Michael Strahan, obviously, like I love him a lot more now that he's in the media. And he's just like, he's a very lovable person. He's super
hilarious.
light. We know that he and Brady are like best friends. So, you know, it's just, you have the respect for your opponent. Oh my God, that was tough. But he's kind of saying like, it felt like light versus dark. which at that point is exactly what it was. And it's kind of ironic because then you had the kind of, it flipped, where it's like the Patriots are the underdogs and everybody loves them. And literally the Giants, the red, white, and blue, where it's like, whew, this is a little on the nose right now where, you know, like I said,
14-point favorites against the best team in football. Like, right.
And Brewski knew it and was like, oh, crap. Like, this is exactly what happened to us back in 2001. So how did you feel when they recapped the game? And also Randy Moss, acknowledging the fact that he did get I think he's taking too much blame.
100%.
Because I don't think, unless he stopped and jumped and got his body into it, that would have been a really tough adjustment.
The DB also made a really good play. The defensive back was right there in the middle of his hands. Like, that was an impossible play for Moss to make. So I thought that was kind of, again, that's what you do as a wide receiver. You take the blame, and if it touches your fingertips, you say you're going to catch it. So that was interesting. I thought Brady, some people, when you lose games like that, you'll never watch it. You bury the tape. I can't look at it. I'll be sick. Brady said that just the other day, or when they taped it just the other day, was watching the Tyree helmet catch. I was like, I think that's kind of interesting that he'll go back and still look at it. And he was like, if that ball tipped up, there was 5 defenders there. And I was just,
they were converging at the catch point. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And so I thought it was interesting that Brady still watches the game and can kind of look at it. And that was funny. The other thing on that Hail Mary type play, I like that kind of Brady called his own play. He was like, hey, scrap the play call, reverse field when I look at you, can it. I thought that was kind of cool too. And Strahan, and this is sort of how it wraps up. I thought Strahan was awesome, and I liked the relationship him and Brady had and how he was talking about how sacking Tom is a Christmas gift. Yeah, and you just want to keep opening the gift. But I also liked how the episode ended, and he was like, we thought we ended it. We thought we did the whole thing. And he was like, but the Patriots weren't done. And then the music changes, and it's it goes, that was really cool. And they show Belichick with a smile again. I was like, oh, they do come back from this. So that was sort of the takeaways from the game itself.
I think that's part of why it was my favorite one so far. Because one, the momentum didn't stop. Again, I think the pacing for the first few were kind of hit or miss because they were doing the flashbacks. That one was straightforward. This is what happened. And then the ending, I was the other ones, I haven't had the same feeling where I was I need to see what happens next. That one, I was I'm pissed that I have to wait till next week because that was really exciting. And then you see them go out, and it's I think it's probably 2009 because Tully Banta-Cain's on the team, 2009, 2010. But then you see Edelman coming out of the tunnel. We're almost there. We're getting there. That would be awesome. But let's wrap it up. Any other things that we didn't hit on that you thought were some cool takeaways?
Let me just look and see. We talked about
also one is Kraft actually protected Bill after saying the schmuck thing, which was very interesting, where he's obviously it's still your team, your coach, you don't want them to look bad, but also Roger Goodell opening with integrity of the game, which always makes me want to climb out of my skin because I'm one, F you, that's not true. And also the fact that one, the Jets thing, which they didn't talk about, where the Jets also committed the Spygate and the league didn't do anything about it. But then we also know that Roger Goodell, as harsh as the fine was, did kind of help their PR campaign to not 100%. Bury Bill, because Kraft was like, hey, don't suspend him. If you care about the integrity of the game that much, and it's right, and you're going to fine him more than anybody ever, you probably want to suspend that guy realistically. But, Kraft got in his ear, so all that integrity talk, it's kind of
crazy for Kraft to admit that he got in the ear of the league and got what he wanted, because that's kind of a behind-the-scenes thing that, you kind of know it happens, and there's backdoor phone calls, and Kraft is boys with Roger and this, that, and the other thing. But nobody really says it out loud, and he never really says it out loud. So for him to be no, I protected Bill's reputation. I called the league and said, please don't suspend him. And they didn't. I think that's a bad look for the league, because Roger comes in, sits down with the documentary people and said, I had to do what was best for the league and the team. And it's no, you didn't. And so I thought that
literally did not.
Yeah, right. That was tough. But no, that's kind of it for this one. It stinks rewatching the 18-1 season, but it's cool to see how they all reacted to it. And the throwing up on the floor and the grown men crying in the locker room is it's crazy that a game can do that to people, but it's Jonathan's kind of recollection. The fact that he had to stop himself and had to stop talking was that was some shit. So that was crazy.
This is what we talked about every week, how odd and uncomfortable it is, not in a selfish way, just like in a human way, to go into a locker room and see all these grown men, just like titans, just like defeated, guys like sitting down, like disheveled and really upset. So I can't even imagine what it felt like for them to be on top of the world and then just plummet again. Especially when you get like Brady telling Randy to like, basically they're making the play up as they go, the way that everybody converged and Tyree still makes the catch. Eli Manning getting out of the sack. It just feels like that was the football gods being like, you thought you got away with it. You didn't.
Yeah.
You're going to break your heart and you're going to know this for the rest of your life. Like just crazy. But yeah, I love that episode. We're going to wrap it up. That was a fun couple episodes. I think it's going to get a little better because we're going to get the next Dynasty, but also a lot of drama is going to get stirred up. We still got Deflategate to deal with, which is not even on the same level as Spygate, where Spygate has validity. They did break the rules. It's like 100%. And then obviously, Deflategate was complete nonsense. Even scientists are like, other than Bill Nye, because of
Bill Nye,
whatever.
Farce, yeah, right.
Lost all credibility, Bill Nye. I trusted you. My entire childhood, I trusted you. I'm going to save those emotions when we actually get there. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you all for watching again. Mike, please let the people know what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline.
Combine week next week. I won't be there, but Taylor will. So we'll be sure to have Taylor on the Six Rings podcast over at WEEI to tell us what's going on over at the Combine. Other than that, keep it locked in on Twitter at Mike Kadlick. A bunch of Patriots stuff, Six Rings podcast, WEEI.com, all that good stuff as we continue on this very important Patriots offseason. So, you can find everything on Twitter.
Yes, sir. All right. I'll see you next week, buddy. I'll see you all later. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.